The operating room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft hiss of the ventilator. I watched Dr. Patricia Morgan complete the final suture on Mrs. Chen's mitral valve, using the exact technique I had developed 18 months earlier. Every hand movement, every instrument angle, every suturing pattern was mine. She had even adopted my preferred positioning of the access ports, the specific measurements I had spent months perfecting through trial and experimentation. "Excellent work, Dr. Morgan," the surgical resident observing from the gallery said through the intercom. "That minimally invasive approach is revolutionary. The patient's recovery time will be dramatically reduced." Patricia didn't correct him. She simply nodded, accepting the praise as if the technique had emerged fully formed from her own surgical genius. I stood in the corner of the OR, ostensibly there to assist but effectively invisible, watching her claim credit for innovations that had cost me countless sleepless nights and professional risks. But Dr. Patricia Morgan had made one critical mistake. She hadn't counted on me being a surgeon who documented everything meticulously. Every surgical video, every technique modification, every peer discussion, every research note had been preserved with timestamps and witnesses. And in exactly 72 hours, I would present the hospital's ethics committee with evidence that would end her surgical career permanently. Before I tell you how I systematically destroyed the woman who stole 18 months of my surgical innovations, I want to invite you to subscribe to The Reckoning. This channel is dedicated to stories of brilliant professionals who refused to let theft define their careers. If you believe that medical innovation should be credited to its true creator, hit that subscribe button. You'll want to see how this ends. My name is Dr. Rebecca Hayes, and I've wanted to be a cardiac surgeon since I was 14 years old. Growing up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, I was the daughter of a public school nurse and an accountant. My mother, Linda Hayes, worked at Roosevelt High School, treating scraped knees and dispensing advice to anxious teenagers. My father, Thomas Hayes, managed accounts for small businesses throughout the Twin Cities. We lived in a modest three-bedroom house in the Powderhorn neighborhood, middle-class, comfortable but never wealthy. My fascination with the heart began during a 7th-grade biology class when Mrs. Patterson brought in a preserved sheep's heart for dissection. While other students recoiled at the sight and smell, I was mesmerized. The elegance of the cardiac architecture, the mechanical precision of the valves, the intricate network of vessels, it all seemed impossibly beautiful and complex. I spent that entire evening reading everything I could find about cardiac anatomy and physiology. My mother noticed my interest immediately. She started bringing home medical textbooks borrowed from the school nurse's office, outdated editions that were being replaced but still contained valuable anatomical information. I would spread them across my bedroom floor and study the diagrams for hours, tracing the path of blood flow through chambers and vessels, memorizing the names of structures in Latin. By 8th grade, I could diagram the entire cardiac cycle from memory and explain the electrical conduction system in detail. My parents supported my ambitions but worried about the financial reality. Medical school was enormously expensive, and we didn't have college savings accounts or family wealth to draw upon. My father sat me down when I was 15 and explained our financial situation with characteristic honesty. "Rebecca, your mother and I will do everything we can to support your education, but medical school costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. You'll need scholarships, you'll need to work, and you'll probably need to take on significant debt. Are you sure this is what you want?" I was sure. I had never been more sure of anything. I told him I would do whatever it took, work as many jobs as necessary, apply for every scholarship available. The path would be difficult, but I couldn't imagine doing anything else with my life. My father nodded and said, "Then we'll figure it out together." I worked relentlessly through high school. I took every advanced science course available, participated in medical volunteer programs at Hennepin County Medical Center, shadowed physicians whenever possible, and maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA. I worked 20 hours per week at a coffee shop near the University of Minnesota campus, saving every dollar for college expenses. My social life was nearly non-existent. While my classmates went to football games and parties, I was studying anatomy or working shifts or volunteering in hospital emergency rooms. The hard work paid off. I received a full scholarship to the University of Minnesota for undergraduate studies, majoring in biochemistry with a minor in mathematics. College was intense but exhilarating. I joined a cardiac research lab in my sophomore year, working under Dr. James Morrison, a renowned cardiologist who was studying heart failure mechanisms. The lab work taught me rigorous scientific methodology and exposed me to cutting-edge research that hadn't yet made it into textbooks. I published my first research paper as a co-author during my junior year, a study examining cellular signaling pathways in failing heart tissue. Seeing my name in a peer-reviewed journal, contributing new knowledge to the field, felt like validation that I was on the right path. Dr. Morrison wrote me a glowing letter of recommendation for medical school applications, calling me one of the most dedicated and talented students he had encountered in 30 years of teaching. I was accepted to Harvard Medical School with a substantial financial aid package that made attendance possible. Moving to Boston in August after graduating from Minnesota felt like stepping into a different world. Harvard Medical School occupied buildings in the Longwood Medical Area, surrounded by world-renowned hospitals including Massachusetts General Hospital, Brigham and Women's Hospital, and Boston Children's Hospital. The concentration of medical expertise and innovation in that few square blocks was overwhelming. Medical school was the hardest thing I had ever done. The volume of information was staggering, the pace relentless, the pressure intense. We learned pathophysiology, pharmacology, clinical skills, and diagnostic reasoning at a speed that felt impossible to sustain. I studied 12 to 14 hours per day, sacrificing sleep and any semblance of normal life. My classmates were brilliant, many coming from privileged backgrounds with family connections in medicine, making me acutely aware of my outsider status. But I excelled in the clinical rotations during third and fourth year. While some students struggled with the transition from classroom learning to patient care, I thrived. The surgery rotation in particular felt like coming home. I loved the precision, the immediate tangible impact, the problem-solving under pressure. When I scrubbed in for my first cardiac surgery case, watching the attending surgeon repair a damaged aortic valve, I knew with absolute certainty that this was my specialty. I applied for general surgery residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the most competitive programs in the country. The interview process was grueling, with multiple sessions evaluating not just medical knowledge but stamina, judgment under pressure, and ability to function in high-stress environments. When the match day results came, and I learned I had matched at Mass General, I called my parents and cried with relief and joy. All those years of sacrifice and work had led to this moment. Surgical residency was 5 years of organized chaos. I worked 80 to 100 hours per week, taking call every third or fourth night, sleeping in on call rooms that smelled of disinfectant and exhaustion. The hierarchy was rigid, with interns at the bottom doing the grunt work and gradually gaining responsibility as we progressed through training. I performed thousands of procedures, suturing lacerations, placing central lines, assisting in complex operations, eventually operating independently under supervision. The cardiac surgery service was particularly demanding. Hearts don't respect work hours or personal needs. Emergency cases came in at 2 in the morning, requiring immediate intervention. Surgeries lasted 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours. The attending surgeons were brilliant but often harsh, believing that brutal training produced better surgeons. I was yelled at, humiliated during case presentations, pushed to my absolute limits physically and emotionally. But I never considered quitting. Every successful surgery, every patient who walked out of the hospital healthy because of our intervention, made the suffering worthwhile. I saw a 72-year-old grandmother able to hold her first great-grandchild because we repaired her failing mitral valve. I saw a 48-year-old father return to coaching his daughter's soccer team after we bypassed his blocked coronary arteries. Those moments of human connection and genuine impact sustained me through the darkest periods of training. I completed general surgery residency and was accepted into the cardiothoracic surgery fellowship at Mass General, an additional 2 years of specialized training. Only the most exceptional general surgery residents were selected for CT surgery fellowships, and matching at Mass General represented the pinnacle of achievement. The fellowship focused exclusively on heart and lung surgery, with rotations through adult cardiac surgery, congenital heart surgery, and lung transplantation. During my fellowship, I became increasingly interested in minimally invasive approaches to cardiac surgery. Traditional heart surgery required splitting the sternum completely, creating a foot-long incision down the center of the chest. Recovery was painful and prolonged, with patients unable to lift anything or drive for months. But newer techniques used small incisions between the ribs, accessing the heart through ports and using specialized instruments. The benefits were obvious: less pain, faster recovery, reduced infection risk, better cosmetic outcomes. The challenge was that minimally invasive cardiac surgery was technically much more difficult. Working through small ports required advanced manual dexterity and spatial reasoning. Surgeons had to operate based on video feeds rather than direct visualization. Many complex procedures that were routine through traditional approaches became extremely challenging through minimally invasive access. As a result, most cardiac surgeons used minimally invasive techniques only for simple cases, defaulting to traditional sternotomy for anything complicated. I became convinced that we could expand minimally invasive approaches to more complex cases if we developed better techniques and instrumentation. During my second fellowship year, I started experimenting with different port placements and instrument angles during routine cases, trying to optimize access for mitral valve repairs. The mitral valve, located on the left side of the heart, was particularly difficult to reach through small incisions. Most surgeons either used full sternotomy or limited minimally invasive surgery to very straightforward repairs. I spent 6 months developing a modified approach that used 3 strategically placed ports with specific angulation to provide optimal access to the mitral valve. The key innovation was using anatomical landmarks to precisely position the ports, ensuring consistent access across different patient body types. I also developed a modified suturing technique that worked better in the constrained space of minimally invasive access. The approach wasn't dramatic or flashy, but it represented hundreds of small refinements that collectively made complex mitral repairs feasible through tiny incisions. I completed my fellowship and was offered an attending position at Mass General, joining the cardiac surgery department as the most junior attending on staff. At 34 years old, I was finally Dr. Rebecca Hayes, fully trained cardiac surgeon. The salary was substantial, finally allowing me to start paying down my $200,000 in medical school debt. More importantly, I had the privilege of operating independently, making surgical decisions, and training the next generation of surgeons. Dr. Patricia Morgan was the senior attending I worked with most closely. She was 45 years old, with 15 years of experience as an attending cardiac surgeon. Patricia had an impressive reputation within the department and nationally, having published extensively and presented at major conferences. She had trained at Johns Hopkins, done her fellowship at Stanford, and had been recruited to Mass General with significant fanfare. She served on multiple hospital committees and was frequently quoted in media articles about cardiac surgery innovations. Our relationship began collegially. Patricia was friendly during my first weeks, offering to help me navigate departmental politics and sharing advice about managing complex cases. We would often scrub in together, with her as the primary surgeon and me assisting, allowing me to continue learning from her experience. She seemed genuinely invested in my development as a surgeon, taking time to teach me subtleties of technique and surgical judgment. 3 months into my attending position, I presented my minimally invasive mitral valve technique at our monthly departmental research conference. These conferences were informal, held in a small lecture room with about 20 surgeons, cardiologists, and fellows attending. I had prepared a presentation with surgical videos, outcome data from my fellowship cases, and detailed technical specifications of my approach. The presentation went well. My colleagues asked thoughtful questions about port placement, instrument selection, and patient selection criteria. Several attendings commented that the technique looked promising and could potentially reduce patient morbidity significantly. Patricia was particularly engaged, taking detailed notes and asking specific technical questions about suturing angles and visualization strategies. After the conference, Patricia approached me in the hallway. "Rebecca, that was an excellent presentation. Your technique shows real promise. I'd like to collaborate with you on developing this further. Perhaps we could co-author a paper describing the approach and present it at the Society of Thoracic Surgeons meeting next year. This could be a significant contribution to the field." I was thrilled. Having Patricia as a collaborator would give the work credibility and visibility. She had relationships with journal editors and conference organizers that I, as a junior attending, didn't have access to. We agreed to meet the following week to discuss the collaboration in detail. Our collaboration meeting took place in Patricia's office, a spacious room with a view of the Charles River and walls covered with framed awards and certificates. I brought all my documentation, surgical videos, technique specifications, outcome data, and draft manuscript sections I had been working on. We spent 2 hours going through everything in meticulous detail. "This is even more comprehensive than I expected," Patricia said, reviewing my surgical videos frame by frame. "You've really thought through every aspect of this approach. The port placement rationale is particularly elegant. Let me study these materials more carefully and draft an outline for how we might structure a publication. Keep this confidential for now. We don't want other surgeons attempting the technique before we've published and established our priority." I agreed without hesitation. In academic medicine, being first to publish was crucial for receiving credit for innovations. I trusted Patricia's judgment about timing and strategy. I gave her copies of all my materials and returned to my clinical work, excited about the potential collaboration. 6 weeks later, I received an email from one of my fellowship co-fellows, Dr. James Park, who was now working at Cleveland Clinic. The subject line was, "Did you see Patricia's STS abstract?" He included a link to the Society of Thoracic Surgeons Conference abstract submission portal, where accepted abstracts were posted publicly before the conference. I clicked the link with confusion. Patricia and I hadn't discussed submitting an abstract yet. We were supposed to be collaborating on a full manuscript first. But there it was, an accepted abstract titled, "Novel Minimally Invasive Approach for Complex Mitral Valve Repair, Technical Innovation and Early Outcomes." The listed authors were Patricia Morgan as first author, followed by 2 surgery residents and a perfusionist from our department. My name didn't appear anywhere. I read the abstract with growing horror. Every technical detail I had developed, every port placement specification, every outcome metric, was presented as Patricia's original work. The abstract even included data from cases I had personally performed during my fellowship. My hands shook as I read it 3 times, hoping I had misunderstood something. But there was no misunderstanding. Patricia had taken my work, attached her name as lead author, and submitted it to the most prestigious cardiac surgery conference in the country without telling me or crediting me in any way. I immediately walked to Patricia's office. She was at her desk, reviewing surgical reports. I closed the door behind me, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rage and betrayal coursing through me. "Patricia, I just saw your STS abstract. The minimally invasive mitral technique, that's my work. You said we were collaborating, but you submitted it with your name only." She looked up calmly, her expression showing mild confusion rather than guilt or defensiveness. "Rebecca, I think you're misunderstanding how academic collaboration works in surgery. You provided some initial technical insights during your fellowship, which were valuable, but the refinement of the technique into a publishable methodology required significant additional work and senior judgment. As the senior surgeon, I synthesized your preliminary observations into a coherent surgical approach worthy of publication. This is standard practice in academic surgery." Preliminary observations? I could barely control my anger. I gave you complete surgical videos, detailed technical specifications, outcome data from 30 cases. That wasn't preliminary, that was a finished technique ready for publication. Patricia's expression hardened slightly. Rebecca, you're a junior attending with less than 6 months of independent practice. I've been doing cardiac surgery for 15 years. When you've been in the field longer, you'll understand that junior surgeons often overestimate the completeness of their work. What you developed during fellowship needed significant refinement to meet the standards for publication in high-impact venues. I provided that refinement. If you have concerns about authorship expectations, we can discuss this at a more appropriate time, but right now I have 3 surgeries scheduled and need to prepare. The dismissal was crushing. She was rewriting history, minimizing my contribution to preliminary observations, and claiming the substantive work as her own refinement and senior judgment. I left her office feeling sick and confused, wondering if I was being naive about academic norms or if Patricia was simply lying to my face. I consulted with Dr. Sarah Chen, another junior attending who had joined the department 2 years before me. Sarah and I had developed a friendship based on shared experiences of being women in cardiac surgery, a field still heavily dominated by men. We met for coffee at a cafe near the hospital. Sarah, is it normal for senior surgeons to take credit like this? Am I being unreasonable to expect my name on work I actually developed? Sarah's expression was sympathetic but also frustrated. Rebecca, Patricia did something similar to me last year. I developed a modification to our aortic valve replacement technique, presented it at department conference, and Patricia later published it with her name as first author. I confronted her and got the same speech about senior judgment and refinement. I talked to the department chair, Dr. Williams, but he essentially said that's how academic medicine works, junior attendings contribute but senior attendings get primary credit. That's insane. In research science, authorship reflects actual contribution. The person who does the work gets credit. Surgery is different, apparently. There's this apprenticeship culture where senior surgeons claim ownership over anything their juniors develop. It's justified as mentorship or supervision, but really it's exploitation. I've learned to just accept it and focus on building my own cases and reputation independently. I left that conversation feeling defeated but also determined. If the departmental culture protected Patricia's behavior, confronting her again would be futile. I needed to document everything meticulously and eventually find a way to establish my own independent track record. But first, I needed to ensure my surgical innovations were properly attributed, even if that meant fighting the entire system. The second incident occurred 4 months later. I had been developing another innovation, this time focused on surgical instrumentation. The minimally invasive approach required specialized retractors and suturing devices that didn't exist commercially. I had been working with the hospital's surgical device lab to prototype improved instruments, spending countless hours after surgeries sketching designs and testing prototypes. The key innovation was a novel retractor with adjustable angulation that could be positioned through a small port but then expanded internally to provide excellent exposure. Traditional retractors were either too rigid or too flimsy for the forces involved in cardiac surgery. My design used a combination of rigid frame and flexible segments that provided stability with adjustability. I had created detailed engineering drawings, worked with the machinist to fabricate 3 prototype versions, and tested them successfully in 5 surgeries. The device worked beautifully, making previously difficult exposure trivial. I documented everything: design sketches, engineering specifications, surgical videos showing the device in use, and feedback from surgical fellows about ease of use. I mentioned the device development to Patricia during a case where we were operating together. The new retractor design is working really well, I said, positioning the device through the port. I'm planning to submit a patent application through the hospital's technology transfer office. That's excellent, Rebecca, Patricia replied, focused on the surgical field. Instrumentation innovation is valuable. Make sure you involve the technology transfer office early. They can help with the patent process. I followed her advice and scheduled a meeting with the Technology Transfer Office the following week. But when I arrived for the meeting, the Technology Transfer Officer, David Martinez, seemed confused by my presence. "Dr. Hayes, I'm a bit unclear about why you're here. Dr. Morgan submitted a provisional patent application for a cardiac retractor device 2 days ago. Are you working on something different?" My stomach dropped. "Can you show me the application?" He pulled it up on his computer and turned the screen toward me. There was Patricia's name as sole inventor on a patent application for my retractor design. The engineering drawings were mine, slightly redrawn but unmistakably identical. The specifications were my specifications. Even the surgical use cases described were cases I had personally performed. "David, this is my design. I developed this over the last 4 months." Dr. Morgan wasn't involved in any aspect of the development. He looked uncomfortable. "Dr. Hayes, the application lists Dr. Morgan as the inventor and includes her attestation that she is the original and sole inventor. If you believe there's an error, you'll need to resolve that with Dr. Morgan directly. I can't arbitrate inventorship disputes." I went directly to Patricia's office, not bothering to contain my anger this time. "You filed a patent application for my retractor design. You put your name as sole inventor on a device I created." Patricia didn't even pretend surprise. "Rebecca, the hospital's intellectual property policy is clear. Innovations developed using hospital resources and during hospital employment belong to the institution. As the senior surgeon overseeing your work, I'm the appropriate inventor of record. This protects the hospital's interests and ensures proper commercialization if the device has market potential." That's not what the IP policy says. It says inventors must be credited appropriately regardless of seniority. You didn't invent this device. You barely even saw it before I mentioned it in passing during a case. I provided the clinical context and judgment that made the device viable. Without my supervision and approval, you wouldn't have been able to test it in actual surgeries. My contribution is substantive and merits inventorship. The conversation was going nowhere. Patricia had clearly decided that anything I developed while working at Mass General was hers to claim, justified through twisted interpretations of supervision and mentorship. I left her office and immediately scheduled a meeting with Dr. Williams, the department chair, hoping for institutional support. Dr. Williams was 62 years old, a respected cardiac surgeon who had led the department for 12 years. His office was filled with textbooks and journals, the desk covered with administrative paperwork. He listened to my concerns with a sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful expression. "Rebecca, I understand your frustration. Academic surgery has complex dynamics around credit and authorship. But Dr. Morgan is a valued member of our faculty with an established track record. These disputes about credit are unfortunately common and rarely have clear resolutions. My advice is to focus on your clinical work, build your own reputation through excellent patient care, and over time you'll establish your own independent identity as a surgeon." But she's stealing my work. The conference presentation, the patent application, these aren't gray areas. She's claiming inventorship of things she didn't invent. The word, stealing, is very charged, Rebecca. I prefer to think of it as differing interpretations of collaborative contribution in an academic environment. I can't adjudicate these disputes in a way that would satisfy everyone. What I can do is encourage you both to communicate more clearly about expectations and credit in the future. I realized I would get no help from the department chair. The institutional structure protected senior faculty, especially those with Patricia's reputation and grant funding. I was on my own. The pattern continued and accelerated. Every innovation I developed, Patricia would absorb and repackage as her own work. She presented my surgical techniques at conferences with her name featured prominently while mine appeared in small font as a junior co-author if at all. She submitted grant applications describing research projects I had conceived and would execute, with her name as principal investigator and mine listed only as a collaborating surgeon. The most painful incident involved a case series one had been compiling. Over 14 months, I had performed 43 minimally invasive mitral valve repairs using my technique, with exceptional outcomes. My complication rate was significantly lower than published benchmarks, and my conversion rate to traditional sternotomy was nearly zero. I had meticulously documented every case, including preoperative imaging, surgical videos, intraoperative data, and long-term follow-up results. I had drafted a complete manuscript for submission to the Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery, the premier journal in cardiac surgery. The manuscript was comprehensive, with detailed methods, statistical analysis, outcome tables, and surgical video supplements. I sent it to Patricia as a courtesy, asking if she wanted to review it before submission since many of the cases had been performed at Mass General. 2 months later, I discovered through a colleague that Patricia had submitted a nearly identical manuscript to the same journal, but with herself as first author and principal investigator. She had used my exact data, my surgical videos, my outcome tables, everything. The only changes were the author names and slight rewording of the introduction and discussion sections. When I confronted her, she claimed she had refined my draft and that her senior authorship was appropriate given her oversight of my work. When I threatened to contact the journal editors, she implied that challenging her would harm my career permanently, that no other institution would hire a junior surgeon known for attacking senior colleagues. I felt trapped. Patricia had positioned herself as the gatekeeper to my success in academic cardiac surgery. She controlled which cases I was assigned, which research opportunities I had access to, and how my work was presented to the broader surgical community. Fighting her openly would likely end my career at Mass General and make me toxic to other institutions. But accepting her theft meant watching my innovations be credited to someone else while I remained invisible. The breaking point came 15 months after I had started as an attending. I was scrubbing in for what should have been a routine mitral valve repair on a 64-year-old patient with degenerative mitral regurgitation. Patricia was the primary surgeon, and I was assisting. We were using my minimally invasive technique, though of course Patricia never acknowledged it as mine. The case was proceeding normally until we exposed the mitral valve and discovered that the pathology was more complex than preoperative imaging had suggested. The patient had not just posterior leaflet prolapse but also significant annular calcification and anterior leaflet restriction. This was a much more challenging repair that would require advanced techniques. I suggested a specific repair strategy based on similar cases I had handled during fellowship. Patricia dismissed my suggestion and attempted a simpler repair approach that I knew wouldn't be adequate. I tried to voice my concerns, but she cut me off sharply. "Dr. Hayes, I've been doing these repairs since before you graduated medical school. Please focus on retraction and let me handle the surgical decision-making." She completed her repair approach, and we performed the standard post-repair assessment. The valve was leaking significantly, the repair had failed. She attempted a revision, but that also failed. We ended up having to replace the valve entirely instead of repairing it, a worse outcome for the patient with longer recovery and lifelong anticoagulation requirements. After the case, in the surgeon's lounge while changing out of scrubs, I couldn't stay silent. "Patricia, that case could have been handled better. The repair strategy I suggested would have worked. The patient ended up with a valve replacement that wasn't necessary." She turned to me with cold anger. "Dr. Hayes, you are dangerously close to insubordination. Questioning surgical judgment after a case is over is inappropriate and unprofessional. That patient received appropriate care. If you continue to undermine my authority, I will have to report your behavior to the department chair as creating a hostile work environment." I realized in that moment that Patricia wasn't just stealing my innovations. She was also making surgical decisions that compromised patient care, and she was using her seniority to silence any criticism. This wasn't just about my career anymore. This was about patient safety and medical ethics. That night, sitting in my apartment overlooking Boston Harbor, I made a decision. I would document everything systematically. Every surgical innovation, every stolen publication, every inappropriate clinical decision, every attempt to silence dissent. Medical documentation was my strength. As a surgeon, I was trained to be obsessively detailed about records. I would turn that training against Patricia. I started with the surgical videos. Every operation at Mass General was recorded through multiple cameras in the OR, with videos automatically saved to a secure hospital server. I had access to all videos from cases I had participated in. I systematically downloaded every video from the past 18 months, organizing them chronologically with detailed annotations about what techniques were being used and when I had developed them. The video evidence was comprehensive. I had recordings of my initial case series using the minimally invasive mitral approach, dated months before Patricia had ever used the technique. I had videos of department conferences where I presented my methods. I had surgical footage showing Patricia using my exact port placements, my exact instrument angles, my exact suturing patterns, techniques she had never used before I developed them. Next, I compiled email evidence. I had never deleted anything, maintaining complete archives of all professional correspondence. I searched through 18 months of emails, identifying every message where I had shared technical details with Patricia. There was the email where I sent her my complete surgical video collection and technique specifications. There was her reply thanking me and promising we would collaborate on publication. There were multiple emails where I proposed research ideas that later appeared in her grant applications with no credit to me. I also found the damning email exchange with the Technology Transfer Office. I had sent David Martinez my preliminary retractor drawings 3 weeks before Patricia's patent filing. His reply acknowledging receipt was time-stamped and proved my prior invention date. I had documentation showing I was the first to disclose the innovation to the hospital, making Patricia's later claim of sole inventorship demonstrably false. The published work was another trail of evidence. I created a detailed timeline showing when I had developed each innovation, when I had presented it internally, when Patricia had first used or claimed it, and when it appeared in publications or presentations under her name. The pattern was consistent and irrefutable. Every major technical advance Patricia had been credited with over the past 18 months had originated from my work, with development timelines I could prove through multiple sources. I reached out to surgical colleagues confidentially, asking if they had experienced similar issues with Patricia. Dr. Sarah Chen confirmed she had lost credit for her aortic valve technique modification. 2 surgical fellows who had rotated through our service shared stories of having their research projects taken by Patricia and published without adequate credit. A cardiothoracic surgery resident named Dr. Michael Torres told me Patricia had claimed credit for a complication reduction protocol he had developed, presenting it at a national conference as her own quality improvement initiative. These colleagues all agreed to provide written statements if needed, documenting their own experiences. The pattern of behavior extended beyond just me. Patricia had been systematically appropriating innovations from junior surgeons and trainees for years, building her reputation on stolen work while the actual innovators remained invisible. I documented the patient care concerns separately. The failed mitral repair wasn't an isolated incident. I had witnessed Patricia make suboptimal surgical decisions in at least 6 other cases over the past year, often ignoring input from other surgeons in the room. I compiled surgical reports, outcome data, and post-operative complications that suggested her surgical judgment was being compromised, possibly by overconfidence from unearned credit for innovations she hadn't actually developed and therefore didn't fully understand. Most critically, I obtained peer-review data from our hospital's quality assurance system. Every surgeon's outcomes were tracked and compared to national benchmarks. Patricia's complication rates had been rising over the past 2 years, particularly for minimally invasive cases. Her conversion rate to open surgery was higher than expected, suggesting she was attempting complex minimally invasive procedures without the technical skill to complete them successfully. This data was confidential but accessible to surgeons for self-assessment purposes. The most damning evidence came from the surgical instrumentation patents. I contacted a patent attorney, Elizabeth Warner, who specialized in medical device intellectual property. She reviewed the patent applications and my documentation of the device development process. Dr. Hayes, this is clear misappropriation of inventorship, Elizabeth said during our consultation at her downtown Boston office. Patent law requires that inventors be the people who actually conceived the invention. Your engineering notebooks, your emails with the hospital machinist, your surgical videos showing first use, all of this establishes you as the true inventor. Dr. Morgan filing a patent application with false inventorship claims is not just unethical, it's potentially criminal fraud. Can the patent be corrected? Absolutely. The Patent Office has procedures for correcting inventorship when errors are discovered. More importantly, any patents granted based on false inventorship can be invalidated entirely. If Dr. Morgan has filed multiple patents with fraudulent inventorship claims, every single one of them is vulnerable to challenge. Given that hospital policy requires truthful reporting of inventorship, she's also violated institutional policy in ways that could justify termination. This gave me a strategy. The publications and presentations were matters of academic ethics, harder to adjudicate definitively. But the patent fraud was black and white. Either you invented something or you didn't. The evidence I had compiled made it impossible for Patricia to claim she had conceived and developed the instrumentation I had created. I spent 3 months organizing all of this evidence into a comprehensive report. The document was 147 pages long, with sections on each major innovation theft, supported by surgical videos, emails, publication timelines, witness statements, and patent documentation. I included a detailed timeline showing the 18-month pattern of systematic appropriation. I concluded with analysis of patient care concerns and recommendations for institutional policy changes to prevent future exploitation of junior faculty. The report was devastating. Reading through it, even I was shocked by how comprehensive and systematic Patricia's theft had been. This wasn't just a few incidents of unclear credit allocation. This was sustained, deliberate fraud spanning dozens of innovations and publications, with multiple witnesses corroborating the pattern. I needed allies before presenting this evidence. Dr. Williams, the department chair, had already shown he wouldn't support me against Patricia. I needed to go above departmental politics to people who cared about institutional integrity regardless of individual reputations. I reached out to Dr. Margaret Foster, the chief of the hospital's medical ethics committee. Dr. Foster was a respected oncologist who had led the ethics committee for 8 years, with a reputation for intellectual honesty and fairness. We met in her office in the cancer center. Dr. Hayes, I appreciate you bringing this to me directly, Dr. Foster said after I gave her a summary of the situation. These are serious allegations that require careful investigation. Before I can involve the ethics committee formally, I need to understand whether you've attempted to resolve this through normal departmental channels. I explained my conversations with Patricia and Dr. Williams, emphasizing that the department chair had explicitly declined to address the concerns. I described the power dynamics that made pursuing departmental resolution futile. I also highlighted the patient care implications, noting that Patricia was performing complex surgeries using techniques she hadn't actually developed and didn't fully understand. Dr. Foster's expression grew more serious as I spoke. The patient care concerns are particularly troubling. If a surgeon is operating beyond their actual competence by claiming expertise they don't possess, that's a serious safety issue. Do you have evidence of specific patient harm? I showed her the quality assurance data, highlighting Patricia's rising complication rates. I walked her through specific cases where Patricia's surgical decisions had led to suboptimal outcomes. I explained how her refusal to accept input from other surgeons in the OR created a dangerous environment where preventable complications occurred. This requires immediate investigation, Dr. Foster said firmly. I'm going to convene the ethics committee for an emergency session. You'll need to present your evidence formally. Be prepared for this to become very difficult. Dr. Morgan will certainly dispute your allegations, and she has powerful allies in the hospital. But if what you're describing is accurate, it represents a profound breach of medical ethics and institutional policy. The Ethics Committee hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. I spent those weeks refining my presentation, preparing for every possible counter-argument, and building my narrative in a way that was factual and unemotional. I practiced presenting the evidence to my apartment walls, timing myself to ensure I could cover everything within the allotted presentation time. I also consulted again with Elizabeth Warner about the legal implications. She advised that if the Ethics Committee validated my concerns, I should consider filing formal complaints with the Patent Office about fraudulent inventorship and potentially with medical licensing boards about patient care concerns. These weren't decisions to make lightly, as they would permanently burn bridges with Mass General, but they might be necessary to establish the truth. The morning of the Ethics Committee hearing arrived. I dressed in my most professional attire, a navy suit with a white blouse, and arrived at the hospital conference room 30 minutes early. The room was set up formally, with a long table at the front where the 7 Ethics Committee members would sit, and a presentation area with a large screen for displaying evidence. Dr. Foster arrived first, followed by the other committee members, 2 senior physicians from different departments, the hospital's chief legal counsel, a bioethicist from Harvard Medical School, a community representative, and a senior nurse from the cardiac ICU. Patricia arrived 10 minutes before the scheduled start time, accompanied by her attorney, a stern-looking man in his 60s carrying a leather briefcase. The hearing began at 9 in the morning. Dr. Foster explained the process. I would present my evidence and concerns for up to 90 minutes, then Patricia would have equal time to respond, followed by committee questions and deliberation. The proceedings would be recorded and transcribed. I started with the surgical technique theft, displaying my original presentation from the departmental research conference alongside Patricia's later conference abstracts and publications. I showed the dates clearly, with my initial presentation predating her claims by months. I played surgical video evidence showing me performing the technique during fellowship, then later videos showing Patricia using identical methods after I had shared my approach with her. The video evidence is particularly compelling, I said, pausing on a split-screen comparison. Note the identical port placements, marked here and here. The angle of approach to the mitral valve, identical. The suturing pattern, identical. Dr. Morgan never used these techniques before I developed and shared them with her. Within 2 months of our collaboration meeting, she was presenting them as her own innovations at national conferences. I moved to the instrumentation patents next. I displayed my engineering notebooks with dated entries showing design evolution, emails with the hospital machinist discussing prototype fabrication, and surgical videos showing first use of the devices. Then I showed Patricia's patent applications, filed weeks after I had developed the devices but claiming sole inventorship. Patent law is very clear, I explained, displaying relevant legal text. Inventors must be the people who actually conceived the invention. These notebooks, these emails, these videos establish beyond doubt that I conceived and developed these devices. Dr. Morgan's patent applications claiming sole inventorship are demonstrably false. The committee members were taking extensive notes. The bioethicist, Dr. Raymond Chen, raised his hand. Dr. Hayes, in your interactions with Dr. Morgan, did she ever acknowledge your contributions verbally, even if she didn't include you in written attribution? Yes, frequently. In private conversations and meetings, she would praise my technical innovations and suggest we collaborate on publications. But when it came time to actually publish or present, my contributions would be minimized or erased entirely. The private acknowledgement was never reflected in public attribution. I presented witness statements from Dr. Sarah Chen, Dr. Michael Torres, and 2 surgical fellows, all describing similar patterns of having their work appropriated by Patricia. I showed the timeline demonstrating that this wasn't isolated to me but represented a systematic pattern over multiple years with multiple victims. Then I addressed the patient care concerns. I displayed the quality assurance data showing Patricia's rising complication rates, particularly in minimally invasive cases. I walked through specific surgical cases where her decisions had led to suboptimal outcomes, including the failed mitral repair I had witnessed. My concern is that Dr. Morgan has been claiming expertise in techniques she didn't actually develop. When you don't truly understand the principles underlying a surgical innovation, you can't adapt it appropriately when cases become complex. She's been operating based on mimicry rather than genuine understanding, and patients are suffering complications as a result. I concluded with a summary of institutional policy violations, fraudulent patent applications, violation of authorship guidelines, and creation of a hostile work environment that suppressed legitimate patient safety concerns. My presentation ran 87 minutes, and I finished by thanking the committee for their time and attention. Patricia's attorney then requested a 15-minute recess before her response. The committee granted the request. During the break, I sat alone in the conference room, reviewing my notes and preparing for Patricia's counter-arguments. I noticed her through the glass walls, speaking intensely with her attorney in the hallway. When we reconvened, Patricia presented her defense. She began by praising my technical skills while characterizing my complaints as a misunderstanding of how academic medicine worked. Dr. Hayes is an exceptionally talented surgeon, Patricia said, standing at the presentation area with confident posture. But she's early in her academic career and doesn't yet fully understand the distinction between technical implementation and the broader strategic and scientific work that transforms individual techniques into publishable research. She claimed that her role as senior surgeon involved synthesizing and refining junior faculty contributions, justifying her primary authorship. She characterized the collaboration I described as her providing essential scientific framing and methodological rigor that made publication possible. She suggested that my complaints reflected unrealistic expectations about academic credit rather than actual theft. Regarding the patents, Patricia argued that she had provided critical clinical insights that made the devices viable for surgical use, meeting the legal standard for inventorship contribution. She produced emails where she had made suggestions about device modifications, claiming these demonstrated collaborative development rather than appropriation. On patient care, Patricia was defensive and dismissive. She characterized the quality assurance data as normal statistical variation and attributed specific case complications to inherent patient risk factors, rather than surgical judgment. She implied that my concerns about her surgical decisions reflected my inexperience rather than legitimate safety issues. Her presentation lasted 73 minutes. When she finished, the committee began their questioning. Dr. Foster addressed Patricia first. Dr. Morgan, you claim that Dr. Hayes doesn't understand academic norms around credit and authorship. But we have testimony from 4 other surgeons describing identical patterns of having their work appropriated by you. How do you explain that consistent pattern? Patricia's composure wavered slightly. I believe those individuals also misunderstood the collaborative nature of academic surgery. When you're training and supervising junior faculty and trainees, there's naturally some ambiguity about credit allocation. But the pattern is remarkably consistent, Dr. Foster pressed. Multiple people, over multiple years, describing the same experience of sharing innovations with you and then seeing those innovations presented publicly as yours without appropriate credit. That seems to go beyond ambiguity into a systematic practice. Patricia's attorney intervened. Dr. Morgan has operated in good faith according to standard practices in surgical academics. Any concerns about specific credit allocations could have been addressed through normal departmental processes rather than this formal ethics complaint. Dr. Chen, the bioethicist, spoke up. Dr. Hayes testified that she did attempt departmental resolution and was told by Dr. Williams that these disputes were common and not amenable to clear adjudication. That suggests the departmental processes failed to address legitimate concerns. The hospital's legal counsel, Andrea Simmons, had been reviewing documents throughout the presentations. She now addressed Patricia directly. Dr. Morgan, I'm particularly concerned about the patent applications. The evidence Dr. Hayes presented shows clear prior development of the instrumentation designs. Your patent applications attesting that you are the sole inventor appear to contradict that evidence. Can you explain the discrepancy? Patricia's voice became defensive. I contributed clinical expertise that was essential to the device's surgical utility. That meets the standard for patent inventorship. I've reviewed patent law on this question, Andrea said, holding up a printed document. Inventorship requires conception of the invention itself, not merely suggestions about use cases or minor modifications. The evidence shows Dr. Hayes conceived the basic design, developed the engineering specifications, and directed the prototype fabrication. Your later suggestions about modifications, assuming they occurred, wouldn't rise to the level of inventorship. Your attestation on the patent applications that you were the sole inventor appears to be false. The room fell silent. Patricia's face had gone pale. Her attorney leaned over to whisper something to her, but she waved him off. Dr. Foster looked at both of us. We're going to adjourn for committee deliberation. We'll reconvene in 2 hours with preliminary findings. Both Dr. Hayes and Dr. Morgan should remain available. The next 2 hours were excruciating. I waited in an empty conference room down the hall, trying to read journal articles but unable to focus. My entire career in academic cardiac surgery depended on what the committee decided. If they sided with Patricia, characterizing this as a misunderstanding or overreaction, I would be finished at Mass General and likely blackballed from other academic institutions. Finally, at 3:30 in the afternoon, we were called back to the Ethics Committee room. All 7 members were seated at the front table, their expressions serious. Dr. Foster held a typed document. The committee has completed its preliminary review of the evidence presented, Dr. Foster began. Our findings are as follows. First, regarding the surgical technique innovations. The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that Dr. Hayes developed these techniques and shared them with Dr. Morgan in the context of what she reasonably understood to be a collaborative relationship. Dr. Morgan's subsequent presentations and publications claiming primary credit for these innovations, without appropriate attribution to Dr. Hayes, represent a serious breach of academic ethics and institutional authorship policies. Patricia sat motionless, staring at the table in front of her. Second, regarding instrumentation patents, the evidence clearly establishes Dr. Hayes as the primary inventor of the devices in question. Dr. Morgan's patent applications claiming sole inventorship are inconsistent with the documented evidence and appear to violate both patent law and institutional integrity policies. We are recommending that the hospital's Technology Transfer Office immediately review all patent applications filed by Dr. Morgan and correct inventorship attributions where appropriate. Third, regarding patient care concerns. While we cannot make definitive conclusions about causation without more detailed case reviews, the rising complication rates and specific case outcomes presented are troubling. We recommend that Dr. Morgan's surgical privileges for minimally invasive cardiac procedures be suspended pending a comprehensive peer review of her recent cases. Patricia's head snapped up. You can't suspend my privileges based on these allegations. This is career destruction based on one disgruntled junior colleague. Dr. Foster's voice was firm but not unkind. Dr. Morgan, the evidence presented isn't just from one colleague. It's corroborated by multiple witnesses, supported by objective data, and demonstrates a pattern of behavior inconsistent with the ethical standards we expect from our medical staff. The suspension is temporary, pending review. If the peer review determines your surgical performance meets appropriate standards, privileges will be restored. Our final recommendation, Dr. Foster continued, is that the hospital's Human Resources Department conduct a formal investigation into whether Dr. Morgan's behavior toward junior faculty and trainees created a hostile work environment that suppressed legitimate concerns about patient care and professional conduct. Depending on the outcome of that investigation, disciplinary actions up to and including termination may be appropriate. Patricia stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is absurd. I've been at this hospital for 10 years. I've published over 80 papers. I bring in millions in research funding. You're going to destroy all of that based on the complaints of someone who's been here less than 2 years? "We're following the evidence wherever it leads," Dr. Foster replied calmly. "Your publication record and research funding don't exempt you from basic ethical standards regarding attribution and inventorship." "This meeting is adjourned." Patricia stormed out of the room, her attorney following quickly behind. I sat frozen, barely able to process what had just happened. The committee had sided with me completely. Patricia's career at Mass General was effectively over. Dr. Foster approached me as the other committee members filed out. "Dr. Hayes, I want you to know that presenting this evidence took tremendous courage. Many people in your situation would have simply accepted the theft and moved on. By fighting back, you've not only protected your own career but potentially protected future trainees and patients from similar exploitation." The formal investigation took 6 weeks. The Human Resources team interviewed 23 current and former surgeons who had worked with Patricia, reviewed hundreds of publications and presentations, and analyzed surgical outcome data comprehensively. Their report confirmed everything I had alleged and uncovered additional incidents I hadn't even known about. Patricia had been systematically appropriating innovations from junior faculty and trainees for at least 7 years, building her entire reputation on stolen work. The pattern was devastatingly clear once investigators looked for it. Early career surgeons would develop techniques or devices, share them with Patricia in the context of mentorship, and then watch as Patricia presented those innovations as her own work at conferences and in publications. The patent fraud was particularly egregious. Patricia had filed 12 patent applications over 5 years claiming sole or primary inventorship on devices and methods developed by others. The hospital's technology transfer office had to initiate corrections on every single patent, several of which had already been granted and would require complex legal processes to correct. The patient care review was equally damning. Patricia's complication rates for minimally invasive cardiac surgery were significantly higher than peer benchmarks, with 8 cases in the past 3 years showing clear evidence of surgical judgment errors that led to preventable complications. In 4 cases, patients had suffered serious harm requiring additional surgeries or extended hospitalizations. The peer review committee concluded that Patricia had been operating beyond her actual competence by claiming mastery of techniques she had appropriated but never truly understood. 2 months after the ethics committee hearing, Mass General terminated Patricia's employment for cause. The termination letter cited fraudulent patent applications, violation of authorship policies, creation of a hostile work environment, and patient care concerns. Patricia fought the termination through her attorney, threatening lawsuits and claiming gender discrimination, but the documented evidence was overwhelming. Her threats went nowhere. The story spread quickly through the cardiac surgery community. Academic medicine is a small world, and Patricia's fall was dramatic enough to generate significant attention. Several journals initiated investigations into papers she had published, eventually retracting 3 publications due to authorship fraud and issuing corrections on 7 others to properly credit the actual innovators. Conference presentations she had given were flagged with disclaimers noting subsequent revelations about misattributed contributions. Patricia attempted to find another academic position, but her reputation was destroyed. No major medical center would hire a surgeon with documented evidence of systematic fraud and patient care concerns. I heard through colleagues that she had tried to repackage herself as a consultant or medical device advisor, but even those opportunities dried up as word spread about her ethical violations. Eventually, she left cardiac surgery entirely. For me, the aftermath was complex. On one hand, I had won completely. My innovations were finally properly credited, with journals publishing corrections and conference organizers acknowledging the true origins of techniques Patricia had presented. The medical device patents were corrected to list me as primary inventor, with patent licensing revenue finally flowing to me rather than Patricia. But I had also become somewhat notorious as the surgeon who had taken down a senior colleague. Some people praised my courage and integrity. Others whispered that I was difficult, that I couldn't navigate academic politics appropriately, that I had destroyed a respected surgeon's career over credit disputes. The cardiac surgery community was divided in their response. Dr. Williams, the department chair, approached me 3 months after Patricia's termination. We met in his office, the same space where he had previously dismissed my concerns as differing interpretations of collaborative contribution. "Rebecca, I owe you an apology," Dr. Williams said, his expression genuinely regretful. "When you first came to me with concerns about Dr. Morgan, I should have taken them seriously and investigated immediately. Instead, I defaulted to protecting senior faculty and institutional stability. That was wrong, and it allowed Patricia to continue harming people. I'm sorry." The apology was meaningful, but it also highlighted systemic failures. How many other junior faculty at other institutions were being exploited in similar ways, with department chairs dismissing their concerns and protecting established senior faculty? My case had succeeded because I had overwhelming evidence and Patricia's fraud was so egregious it couldn't be ignored. But what about more subtle cases, where credit was eroded gradually rather than stolen dramatically? I decided to use my experience to push for institutional change. I worked with Dr. Foster and the Ethics Committee to develop new policies for authorship disputes, creating clear procedures for junior faculty to escalate concerns without fear of retaliation. We implemented mandatory training for all faculty on ethical standards for credit attribution and intellectual property. We created an ombudsman position specifically for addressing research credit disputes. Mass General also revised its surgical credentialing process, requiring more rigorous documentation when surgeons claimed expertise in new techniques. Surgical privileges became explicitly tied to demonstrated competence rather than claimed expertise, with regular peer review to ensure surgeons were performing within their actual skill levels. These changes made it harder for future Patricia Morgans to operate beyond their competence based on stolen credentials. Professionally, my career flourished in unexpected ways. The publicity around the case, while uncomfortable, raised my profile nationally. I was invited to present my minimally invasive techniques at major conferences, now with proper attribution. The Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery published my case series with me as sole first author, validating years of work. Medical device companies approached me about licensing my instrumentation designs, generating substantial revenue. 2 years after Patricia's termination, I was recruited to Johns Hopkins as an associate professor of cardiac surgery with a guaranteed research budget and protected time for innovation. The offer came with significant prestige and resources that would have taken many more years to achieve through normal academic progression. Johns Hopkins valued exactly what Mass General had nearly allowed Patricia to steal: my surgical innovations and technical creativity. At Hopkins, I built a research program focused on minimally invasive cardiac surgery, training the next generation of surgeons in techniques I had developed. I made a point of being scrupulous about crediting trainees and junior faculty, implementing documentation systems that made credit attribution transparent and unambiguous. Several of my trainees published first author papers on innovations they developed in my lab, properly credited and supported throughout the publication process. I also became an advocate for reform in academic medicine's credit culture. I published opinion pieces in medical journals about the exploitation of junior faculty and the need for systemic changes to authorship policies. I gave talks at medical schools about documentation practices and how to protect your innovations in collaborative environments. My experience with Patricia became a cautionary tale used in ethics courses, illustrating how power differentials can enable sustained fraud. 5 years after the Ethics Committee hearing, I testified before a congressional committee examining research integrity and intellectual property issues in academic medicine. I described my experience and presented data showing that junior faculty appropriation was widespread, with surveys indicating that over 40% of early career academic physicians had experienced credit theft at some point in their careers. My testimony contributed to new federal guidelines requiring more transparent authorship policies at institutions receiving research funding. The minimally invasive cardiac surgery techniques I developed became widely adopted, improving outcomes for thousands of patients annually. Surgical recovery times decreased, complications became less common, and patients returned to normal activities months faster than with traditional approaches. This widespread adoption was deeply satisfying, seeing innovations I had created improving lives across the country and internationally. I received multiple awards for surgical innovation and medical ethics, including the American College of Surgeons Distinguished Service Award and the American Heart Association's Clinical Research Prize. These recognitions validated not just my technical work but also my fight against the system that had tried to erase my contributions. Each award felt like vindication for the terrifying decision to confront Patricia and risk my career for truth. My personal life also evolved. During my first years at Johns Hopkins, I met Dr. James Chen, a cardiothoracic anesthesiologist who understood the demands of cardiac surgery and shared my commitment to innovation and patient care. We married 3 years after I joined Hopkins, creating a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. We had 2 children, and I discovered it was possible to balance surgical career with family life, though it required intentional choices and strong boundaries. Patricia's trajectory remained dismal. I heard through the medical community that she had tried various non-clinical positions, medical writing, pharmaceutical consulting, none of which worked out. The documented fraud followed her everywhere, making employers wary of potential liability. Eventually, she moved out of state and disappeared from the medical community entirely. Her cautionary tale remained, but the person herself became invisible. Looking back on those 18 months of theft and the terrifying decision to fight back, I'm grateful for several things. First, that I had the training and discipline to document everything meticulously. Without comprehensive evidence, my allegations would have been dismissed as interpersonal conflict or sour grapes. The surgical videos, emails, patent documentation, and witness statements created an irrefutable case that forced institutional action. Second, that I had allies like Dr. Foster who took ethics seriously enough to investigate thoroughly rather than protecting institutional reputation. Academic medicine's tendency to protect senior faculty makes accountability rare. Dr. Foster's willingness to pursue truth regardless of political consequences was crucial to achieving justice. Third, that I trusted my own judgment about right and wrong rather than accepting institutional narratives that dismissed my concerns. Dr. Williams had told me these disputes were common and unresolvable. Patricia had told me I didn't understand academic norms. The prevailing culture suggested I should accept credit theft as normal. Refusing to accept that narrative, trusting that systematic fraud was wrong regardless of how common it might be, was essential to fighting back effectively. The 72 hours between deciding to file the ethics complaint and the actual hearing were the most terrifying of my life. I nearly backed out dozens of times, convinced I was committing career suicide by challenging a powerful senior surgeon. But I had developed something remarkable through years of training and innovation, and I refused to let someone else claim it as their own. To anyone reading this who has had their work stolen in academic medicine or any professional field, who has watched someone else claim credit for your innovations, who has been told this exploitation is normal and you should accept it, document everything. Every email, every research note, every presentation, every conversation about your work. Build an irrefutable paper trail. And when the moment comes, present your evidence systematically to people who have the authority and integrity to act on it. Patricia Morgan spent 18 months building her reputation on my stolen surgical innovations, appropriated research, and fraudulent patents. It took me 90 minutes to dismantle that reputation completely with evidence she couldn't refute. The truth, when properly documented and presented to people who care about integrity, is devastatingly powerful. And that is how you get revenge.